Hey guys, TJ here with Dead History, and we're back today for part 2 of our 4-part series taking a look at who, Henry?
Abraham Lincoln, 16th president.
That's right, where is he? The guy who? Behind us. That's right, the guy behind us, Abraham Lincoln. And here in part 2 today, we're actually going to take a look at his presidency. So not only are we going to take a look at all the fascinating things that he did as president, such as the Emancipation Proclamation, which we all know about with slavery.
What?
We're going to take a look at the Gettysburg Address that he did at the battlefield of Gettysburg. We're going to get into all that, show you some really great photos and videos of that. And we're just going to get through all the crazy things of the Civil War, his presidency, slavery, you name it. And then, of course, what his plan was for after the Civil War ended. What was Reconstruction going to look like under Abraham Lincoln? Unfortunately, we'll never know, of course, but we're going to dive into what that might have looked like. So, sit back and relax. What do they got to do, Henry?
Hit subscribe down below, leave all your comments and questions, give us a like, and hit that little notification button.
That's right, because we're going to sit back now and watch part 2 of our Lincoln 4-part series, our next presidential series installment. And this is Dead History. Hey guys, TJ back with you. And here we go, part 2, looking at the presidency, the amazing legacy of our 16th president of the United States, old Honest Abe behind us, Abraham Lincoln. Henry, one of your favorite presidents?
Yep, definitely my favorite president.
Oh, wow, his all-time favorite. That's pretty cool. So there you go. One of Henry's favorite presidents, one of my favorite presidents, and probably a lot of people's favorite president. I mean, he's definitely one of our most beloved. That's why you got 4 parts for Mr. Lincoln.
Oh, my God.
So, yep. So sit back, because here we go. Grab the popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy. We got part 2, the presidency and legacy of Abraham Lincoln. Enjoy. Hey guys, welcome back. Here we are, part 2 of our 4-part series taking a look at the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. This is TJ with Dead History, flying solo for the audio on this part 2 here today. Henry's not with me. So I'm going to jump right in. As you know, part 1, we took a look at basically the birthplace and the childhood of Abraham Lincoln. Now we are going to take a look at basically his presidency. I mean, that's really what part 2 is going to be. It's just going to be about the presidency, the Civil War, slavery, you know, that whole thing, his whole legacy as far as the office of presidency. So we're going to jump right in. As I said in part 1, born in Kentucky, lived in Kentucky until he was about 18, moved to Indiana for a few years. Then when he was around 21, moved to Illinois. As I told you, Lincoln was a very self-educated man. He had very, very little formal schooling his entire childhood growing up. And then, you know, because he was self-taught, he basically was a self-taught lawyer. You know, he put himself through school eventually. And in September of 1836, he was admitted to the bar, allowing him to practice law in Illinois. And in the spring of 1837, he moved to Springfield, Illinois, a city with 1,500 residents at the time, where John T. Stuart took him as a junior partner. Stuart and Lincoln was located at number 4 Hoffman's Row, also known as 5th Street, and Stuart introduced Lincoln to his social circle and quickly made friends. Stuart, actually, interesting enough, John T. Stuart, he was actually elected for a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, and he left Lincoln the majority of the firm's business, but keeping his share of the profits. The firm was successfully run by Lincoln, but his partnership with Stuart dissolved and entered a new partnership with a man by the name of Stephen T. Logan. So that's just kind of a little brief history about the early years of Lincoln being a lawyer. You know, I did want to touch on that because I did mention that before. Just a couple things kind of when we jump in here. Before pursuing national politics, Lincoln served 4 consecutive terms in the Illinois state legislature, legislature. Though lawyers are often considered untrustworthy, his reputation for honesty and fairness helped Honest Abe win local elections. So, pretty cool stuff there about Lincoln early on political career, so to speak. He was kind of a president of firsts. He was actually the first bearded president ever. He was the first to ever hold a patent. And he was the first to be in inaugural photographed during his inauguration. John Wilkes Booth can actually also be seen in the inaugural photograph standing on the balcony above. So that's kind of an interesting little fact about Lincoln being a first with some of the things he did and accomplished as president. But obviously John Wilkes Booth we're really going to be touching on in part 3 of our series here. But just a fun little fact there. The truth of the matter is Lincoln really had very little political experience before taking the office of presidency. He had served in the House of Representatives in the 1840s, but he was defeated after only one term when he was basically one of a few to oppose the Mexican-American War. He did not get reelected. He only served the one term in the House of Representatives. So, the truth is it's really hard to imagine anyone with less administrative experience than Lincoln. He had managed a small law office with about 3 clerks, and that was it. There was really nothing, he was really an unknown. When you really stop and look at the landscape of the country and especially the political landscape, moving toward the year of 1860 when Lincoln was first elected, Abraham Lincoln really was just an unknown guy. He wasn't like this career politician. You look, just to kind of give an example, you look at somebody like our current president right now, Joe Biden. He's a career politician. I mean, the man was senator for 40 years, vice president to President Barack Obama, now president of the United States. I mean, it's a career politician. You look at somebody like his predecessor, Donald Trump. Donald Trump, career businessman, of course. And he really wasn't a career politician, Donald Trump. So, it's just one of those things. Lincoln Donald Trump's much different because this day and age, social media and all his television stuff and blah, blah, blah. He was a very well-known public figure, Donald Trump. But, as far as Lincoln back in 1860, he really just was an unknown. There was no political career. It wasn't like he had this big name for himself out there around the Washington, D.C., political groups and everything. It wasn't like that. So the Republican Party they just wanted to gravitate toward Lincoln in 1860. They did. They gravitated toward him. One, basically because he was somewhat of a more moderate politician. And Lincoln also had the advantage of coming from the Midwest. And the Republican Party really had their eye on capturing the Midwest in the presidential contest. That was kind of like that. They had their eye on the prize, the Midwest. So of course, Lincoln being from Kentucky and then Indiana and Illinois, that was big for them. In November of 1860, all across the country, people trekked to the ballot box. It was actually one of the largest electoral turnouts up to that point. 81% of all eligible voters cast their votes in 1860. That is a staggering number, just so everybody can kind of get a grasp on that. I mean, a staggering number. 81% of all eligible voters came out and voted in the presidential election of 1860. Just to kind of put that in some sort of perspective for some people that may not know, in the 20th century alone, most presidential elections would fail to draw more than 65% of eligible voters. So this one election, 81% of eligible voters came out and voted. It's pretty incredible. Of course, he did win. We know that, of course, in 1860. He swept the entire North from New England to the upper Midwest, but he did not receive a single popular vote from 9 southern states. Truth is, he squeaked into office as the 16th president. And really, his victory proved to be the death nail for the Union. It really was. Just to touch a little more on the actual election of 1860, you're seeing on your screen here with the electoral map of that election. he went up against Breckinridge, John Breckinridge, who received 72 electoral votes. Lincoln won with 180 electoral votes. And then there was John Bell, who was a Constitutional Union Party member. He only had 39. And then Stephen Douglas, who was a Democratic candidate. He only had 12 electoral votes. So those were the four men really basically running. And as you see, my home state of New Jersey actually split its electoral votes. 4 went to President Lincoln, and 3 actually went to Stephen Douglas. So pretty interesting stuff there. So that was the election of 1860 when Abraham Lincoln was first elected. There is no question that the election of Lincoln and him becoming president and the fact that Lincoln would not allow for the expansion of slavery, this is what first led South Carolina to succeed only 1 month after he won the election. He won the election. Within a month later, South Carolina said, "We're done." They seceded from the Union. And then 6 more southern states would follow before Lincoln would even take the oath of office, which was in March of 1861. So you're talking in a span of about 4 months or so, 7 total southern states, South Carolina to be the first and then 6 others, seceded from the Union, and Abraham Lincoln hadn't even taken the oath of office yet. So you could see that at this time, the nation was officially, truly divided. Not to say that it hadn't been steamrolling toward that for many, many years, but this was it. We were officially a divided nation, a nation that was North and South, a nation that was pro-slavery and all for it, and a nation, of course, the other part in the North, anti-slavery and against it. So it was definitely tumultuous times for sure. Lincoln was somewhat of a workaholic. He really was. He started his days by like 6 a.m., 6 in the morning, and most times he wouldn't end till after 11 o'clock, 11 p.m. at night. Yes, so literally like 15, 16-hour work days this man would put in, only stopping to basically eat and maybe catch some fresh air outside or something. That was it. He was a very, very big proponent of work. He had a lot on his plate. Let's face facts. Abraham Lincoln took over a country, as I said, that was we were in tumultuous times. We were divided. Civil War. Really, I think the reason that a lot of historians and a lot of us Americans make the case for Abraham Lincoln being the greatest president we ever had was point blank, of course, slavery, which we're going to get into all that, what he did. But it really was the Civil War. No other president in our history has had to deal with a civil war where brother versus brother, cousin versus cousin, North versus South. This was a blood-drenched American war. This was not the Japanese or the Germans or, Iraq or Afghanistan. This was American lives and American casualties, people that were here on our own soil fighting each other. And we've never, ever, ever been faced with that since. Beforehand, really, it's something that's where you really have to take into great consideration where Lincoln may have been the greatest president that we've ever had, having to deal with that. The busy president, President Lincoln, he decided to table any decisive action regarding secession. He basically said immediately that he was not recognizing this new Confederacy as a real nation or a real opponent. It was merely a revolt among dissatisfied people. That's basically how Lincoln felt. He felt like this is just, these people are aggravated, they're pissed off, and this will blow over, so to speak. Not so much that, I don't want to make it seem like he took it nonchalantly, because that would be unfair and irresponsible. But I don't think at first, especially when he first took over office, I don't know if Lincoln truly believed that this would be as long and drawn out as it was, and if Lincoln truly put as much stock into the Confederacy and the secession of the southern states the reality of how dire the situation truly was. Maybe that's just my opinion, but that's kind of what I read into it. In April of 1861, there was a small company of Union soldiers who were occupying Fort Sumter in South Carolina. And anybody who knows anything about the Civil War is very, 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 very familiar with Fort Sumter in South Carolina. So basically, Lincoln was trying to resupply the soldiers, the Union soldiers that were occupying Fort Sumter. And however, the people of South Carolina at the time, in April of 1861, they felt that this was their property. They owned it. They owned South Carolina. We're no longer a part of the Union. We seceded. So this is our own territory, our own state, our own nation, so to speak. You don't have any right to do anything here or be occupying a fort here or send in resupply for troops that are stationed here. That's a no-no. But Abraham Lincoln did not back down, but he also did not engage either. He did not engage the Confederate troops that were stationed right outside of Fort Sumter. He wasn't going to engage, but what he did do, he did send provisions, but not reinforcements. He sent provisions, and Lincoln, he basically, by doing this, he decided to put the decision of whether to engage in combat and to fire first, so to speak, solely on the Confederate president, who was Jefferson Davis. And Jefferson Davis did not hesitate. He basically looked upon Lincoln sending those provisions as an act of war. That's how Jefferson Davis felt. He felt like this was an act of war. Jefferson Davis kind of looked at it as like, dangling the carrot, so to speak, in front of his face. And he took the bait. Davis took the bait. And of course, Jefferson Davis demanded that the Union soldiers at Fort Sumter surrender. They refused to surrender. So then the Confederate troops fired upon Fort Sumter. And that was the first, basically, shots fired of the Civil War. And now Lincoln, he basically said that he was forced into war. He had no choice. It was forced upon him. Here he is sending in provisions and resupplies for these Union troops at Fort Sumter, and these people were fired upon by the Confederacy. So now it's time for, I have no choice. As they say, my hand has been forced. I have no choice but to now go to war. Now, after this, right after Fort Sumter, Lincoln now does one of the most controversial things, if not the most controversial thing of his entire presidency. And what does he do? He suspends the writ of habeas corpus. On April 27th of 1861, Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus between Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia to give military authorities the necessary power to silence dissenters and rebels. Under his order, commanders could arrest and detain individuals who were deemed threatening to military operations, and those arrested could be held without indictment or arraignment. And Lincoln did address this a bit. He addressed the issue in a message to Congress in July of that year. He justified the suspension through Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, which specifies the suspension of the writ when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. So very, very controversial. Probably, I don't even want to say probably, I'm going to say most definitely the most controversial thing that Lincoln did throughout his presidency was suspending the writ of habeas corpus. And just to give you a little bit more meat on the bone, so to speak, regarding this time frame, in May of 1861, so a couple months before he addressed what he did and why he made the suspension, a couple of months before that, in May of 1861, Maryland at the time was considered a border state. And it was basically torn apart by Unionists and Southern sympathizers. And Baltimore, Maryland, which, biggest city there in Maryland, was basically a city in fear. Armed troops marched the streets of Baltimore. Newspapers were shut down. Telegraphs were censored. And even the city's leaders, Baltimore's city leaders, were thrown into military prison. And yeah, the man behind all of this reign of terror, so to speak, was Abraham Lincoln, because of the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. So Lincoln basically, he knew that if Maryland joined the Confederacy, if the state of Maryland joined the Confederacy, that Washington, D.C. would be cut off from the North. So he would do anything necessary to stop that. That was, one thing that people, I think, kind of misconstrue a bit, and I think gets a little misconstrued regarding Lincoln sometimes, is everyone thinks, slavery was such a hot button issue with Abraham Lincoln. Now, don't get me wrong. He was against slavery, the Emancipation Proclamation, which we're going to get into here in a few minutes. I'm not trying to downplay Lincoln's role in ending slavery, but what I'm saying is it was not, the hot button item or topic for Abraham Lincoln. His biggest thing was he wanted to keep the Union together. He did not want the Union to fall and to be divided, and that was his biggest thing. That was his most important thing for Abraham Lincoln. And during this time, when all this was going on, the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus and, Fort Sumter happened and, all these things, one of Lincoln's most important contributions to the presidency, if not really the most important, was the development of war powers notion of the presidency. He suspended the writ of habeas corpus, as I just touched on. He basically is trying to isolate and quarantine, basically, a word for our present-day situation in America. He was trying to quarantine, if you will, the diehard rebels of all their support and smother the rebellion. I mean, it almost sounds like, he was trying to quarantine the diehard rebels and smother the rebellion. It almost sounds like something out of Star Wars, like you expect Darth Vader to walk onto the screen or something. But that's really what he did. That's what the whole purpose behind the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus was. After Fort Sumter, Lincoln took on the first of his extraordinary executive powers. He called up the militia. He called for 75,000 troops. He imposed the blockade on southern ports. And he did all of these things, all of the above, without the consent of Congress, who was in recess at the time. This was unheard of. This was totally unheard of. He did all these things and did not even have the approval of Congress, who was currently in recess. A lot of people at the time, and even historians since, they feel that Lincoln may have overstepped the Constitution. He's condemned for the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. The Constitution, as I touched on, says that one of the two times you can suspend the writ of habeas corpus is during a rebellion. And actually, the Supreme Court demanded that the federal government produce a writ of habeas corpus, and Abraham Lincoln literally ignored the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. He ignored him. Yes, literally ignored. And that's the thing about Lincoln. A lot of people are like, oh, well, tell me, the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, but I'm sure he had all these people, behind him. No, I mean, like I said, he did some of these things without even Congress's approval. And then, all these people, the Supreme Court were basically telling him, you need to do something about this. The Chief Justice at the time of the Supreme Court, who was man right here on the screen, Roger B. Taney, or I don't know if it's Taney or Taney, how you pronounce, but Roger B. Taney, he literally basically told him, you need to come up, you need to produce a writ of habeas corpus, and Lincoln just ignored him. It was a very daring and very politically astute thing that Lincoln did. It just truly was. And at this time, Lincoln, he basically embodies the term commander-in-chief, even though he had less military experience and knowledge than just about anybody who has ever had to practically use that role. He came to it with the briefest of experiences in uniform. He was a member of a volunteer company in an Indian war in the 1830s. The fact is that when Lincoln became president, he really knows next to nothing about military affairs, and suddenly he has to sketch out and respond to a number of crises that force him to define and to articulate this commander-in-chief job. He's basically thrown into this. And a lot of people really forget that Lincoln, he was really the one who learned how to use the telegraph to communicate with his field officers in real time. He knew what was going on. He was very well aware of what was going on the battlefields. And this really, it changed the way a president would be an active participant in a war. It truly did. And as I touched on a few minutes ago, Abraham Lincoln's main purpose in the Civil War was to preserve the Union. Point blank. That's it. That was his big thing. I need to preserve the Union. That was it. And unfortunately, side note here, kind of, Lincoln was so consumed with his responsibility for the nation at the time that when his son Willie died of typhoid fever, it barely even seemed to register with Abraham Lincoln. Willie Lincoln and his brother Tad Lincoln, they became ill in early 1862, possibly with typhoid fever. Tad Lincoln was relatively lightly affected, but Willie Lincoln gradually weakened. And both Mary Todd Lincoln and Abraham Lincoln spent much of their time at his bedside. And Willie Lincoln died on February 20th of 1862. Both Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd Lincoln and Tad, his brother, were deeply affected. You would not have known from Lincoln's day-to-day conduct of business in the White House in that time period of February, March of 1862, you would have never known that something in the nature of like a personal crisis had just happened to him. The way he conducted himself, no one really would have known. However, privately, Lincoln was crushed. He was devastated by the death of his son, Willie. He was completely crushed. As a matter of fact, Abraham Lincoln said, and I quote, "My poor boy, he was too good for this earth. God has called him home. I know that he's much better off in heaven, but then we loved him so much. It is hard to have him die." That was the words of Abraham Lincoln about his son Willie's death. After the burial, Abraham Lincoln shut himself in a room and he wept alone, literally wept. Mary Lincoln, she remained in bed for 3 weeks and was unable to attend Willie's funeral or look after Willie's brother Tad. Abraham Lincoln had to take solace in caring and comforting for Tad, who at the time did remain very ill, and Tad himself was grieving for his brother Willie's death. So really crazy stuff. Here we are, this man is elected president, Civil War breaks out. He does all these really bold moves, suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, blockade of the southern ports. He demands 75,000 more troops, all these things. A lot of things not even with Congress's approval. Supreme Court, Chief Justice is on his rear end. You need to produce a writ of habeas corpus, all these things. We're in the throes of civil war. Our country is literally fighting one another, North versus South. And here now this president, this man loses a son. And I can't even imagine, a parent. I'm a parent myself, as you guys know, with Henry. And I can't even fathom the loss of a child, especially when you are the leader of the free nation, the free world, and you're going through a civil war in the country at the time. It's almost unfathomable to me. Well, after this time and during this time, really, with little opposition in Congress at the time, due to basically the southern states were obviously out. They weren't in the Union. They were out. Lincoln basically, he was able to accomplish a wide range of domestic agenda at the same time as conducting this Civil War. So a few things touch on. The Homestead Act, it opened up the Midwest to settlement. The Land Grant College Act introduced a public component to higher education for the very first time. The Pacific Railway Act provides the infrastructure for the Transcontinental Railroad. All these things he was able to accomplish. But, we really do need to obviously now touch on, perhaps Lincoln's most profound achievement and perhaps his greatest accomplishment was the Emancipation Proclamation. One of Lincoln's greatest attributes was his incredible sense of timing. With slavery, he hesitated because he wanted to keep the support of people who had different kinds of feelings about slavery. So he hesitated to free the slaves, truly and honestly. But just like any smart person, he reads more, he learns more, he's open-minded about the subject, and he realizes the time has come to end slavery. He simply changes his mind. The fact of the matter is that Lincoln was not an abolitionist. Lincoln was long allied with abolitionists and outlawed slavery by issuing the Emancipation Proclamation, legally freeing some 3 million slaves at the time. However, in Abraham Lincoln's first inaugural address, Lincoln stated that he had no lawful right to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. So that was right in 1861 when he made that statement during his first inaugural address. So, in some ways and in some measure, Lincoln encapsulates what happened to the country. Lincoln believed that slavery was wrong. He said this his entire adult life, and many, many people grappled with that as a moral issue. And at the time, knowing how sensitive the topic was, Lincoln did not risk any wrangling in Congress over this. Once again, Lincoln acted unilaterally. He just did it himself. As a matter of fact, to be technical, when Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st of 1863, to be exact, he does not actually have any civil authority to emancipate slaves as president. But he does, or at least he claims authority to do so as commander-in-chief as a wartime necessity. So he doesn't really have the authority to do it as president, but Abraham Lincoln basically says, I don't care. I'm doing this, and I have the authority to do this as commander-in-chief as a wartime necessity right now. So again, he basically just goes over the head of Congress or any of that stuff. He just does it. And there's a lot of people, especially historians and critics, if you will, that now say that, the Emancipation Proclamation and what he did had no effect. But how true is that really? Because for the next year, actually probably for the next year and a half to 2 years, whenever a Union army advanced in the Confederate South, slaves were freed in their wake. That is the truth of the matter. And I had a very, very good friend who is a very astute, amazing historian himself. I'm not going to mention his name because I don't know if he would like me to do that, but he gave me some really great points about this that I'm going to touch on right now. And, some of this is my own, but a lot of this is his own words and what he feels. The truth is, however, it would not be responsible of me to not recognize some other factors that played into all this. I do not want to paint in any sort of way that Abraham Lincoln was the savior who single-handedly ended slavery, because that's truly not the case. Yes, he did play a very, very important role in ending slavery legislatively, no doubt. But black people who were self-emancipating and black activism were also extremely important at the time. A lot of these black people had to free themselves. If they weren't liberated by the Union armies that were coming into these Confederate southern areas, they basically had to free themselves. They had to emancipate themselves. And it brings up the questions of, how would the war end any other way than it did? And, what does an earlier peace entail, really? The South, they want slavery, period. During this time, the southern states in the South want slavery. So either the Union would have to let them back in and continue slavery, or they would just be separate countries and slavery would continue on in the South. As a matter of fact, in 1862, Abraham Lincoln himself did say that he would keep slavery if it would save the Union. Yeah, and at the same time that he made those statements, he was working on the Emancipation Proclamation. Like I said, first and foremost for Abraham Lincoln was to save the Union. The Emancipation Proclamation was almost like a means to an end. He knew slavery was wrong. He wanted it to end. He did not agree with it. He was not okay with it. But he said, I have to do something because this is not right. We need to end slavery. But I also have to make sure that I can reconstruct and basically put the Union back together even after this war ends, if this is what I'm going to do. You know, don't get me wrong. He was not for slavery. He played a huge role. However, he is just not the end-all and be-all of ending slavery that history and historians and teachers have taught all of us to believe over the years. He was in a very tough spot. You know, he really was. Let's face facts. Nobody's ever been in a spot like Lincoln was with the war and the slavery issue at the time. You know, how much could he do in each circumstance without alienating the border states and, by his calculations, hindering the reunification of the Union after the war? And truth is, as I said, saving the Union was his number one priority. That was his thing. I need to save the Union. The Union is most important to me. And due to the fact that that was his most important issue, he often caught flack from black activists, such as somebody like Frederick Douglass, right here on the screen. Frederick Douglass believed that Lincoln acted too slowly on it all. And he did, Lincoln at times did catch some flack for all this. But all this was going on with slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation still was a huge step. So Abraham Lincoln deserves a ton of credit when it comes to the legislative part of slavery and ending slavery. But it is really, the black activists and the self-emancipating blacks and, people like Frederick Douglass and those kind of people that were really on the forefront of trying to free his own people and emancipate slaves, they don't get their due as much as they deserve as well, because they played a gigantic role in the ending of slavery and freeing black people and getting black people the rights that they deserved, that they should have been given from the start of our nation. But all told, Abraham Lincoln, bravo, great job with slavery, but not the end-all, be-all that sometimes it's depicted out to be. That's all. When all this was going on, with the slavery issue, the Northern War effort, during the Civil War, the Northern War effort was floundering. Union casualties were at almost 100,000 deaths at this point. And Lincoln, he was in desperate need of better military leaders. And, up to this point, he had ineffective generals. He had, McClellan and Burnside, and they were not aggressive enough in Lincoln's eyes. They kept the war more competitive than it should have been for a long time. And the biggest challenge that Lincoln faced with generals was that they lost when they really should have won. That was the biggest challenge. As I kind of touched on earlier in this part, Lincoln really thought that this would be a 90-day war. He thought that it was going to be the Southern Confederacy. It wasn't a big threat. This would be like a 90-day war and it'd be done. So Lincoln, he had to look for a fresh face. He had to look for fresh blood. So what did Lincoln do? He removed General George McClellan, and as he struggled to find an adequate replacement over the coming months after that, and emboldened Robert E. Lee, who was the head Southern general at the time, he decided to invade the North. And where was the place that General Robert E. Lee decided he was going to invade? Yep, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. That would be the place. And what a mistake that was for Robert E. Lee in the South. Lee's miscalculation resulted in the worst defeat for the South since the war began. There was actually 28,000 casualties in just 3 days. Craziness. And the words that Lincoln wrote in the aftermath of that Northern victory made the Battle of Gettysburg immortal. What you're seeing here now on the screen, and what you're going to see over the next probably few minutes on the screen, is my visit to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The battlefield, the Gettysburg, the cemetery there, where Lincoln, of course, gave that memorable Gettysburg address. There's some monuments and memorials that are constructed there, nowadays, of course. And of course, there's statues and all sorts of things. So these things that you're seeing, you're probably going to see a couple little video clips too of myself over these next few minutes. This is all Gettysburg. Lincoln, really, he is the greatest presidential writer, and he may even be possibly the greatest writer in all of American history. The entire Gettysburg Address is actually some 250 words. It only takes like 3 minutes to read. Lincoln understood the value of getting your message out in a very few words. He understood the value of that, unlike me, who rambles on and on during my videos. The Gettysburg Address was the poetic accompaniment that committed the country to improving itself, to completing unfinished work based on the sacrifices of those who were fighting to restore the American democracy. That's really what it came down to. Gettysburg really, truly was a turning point. It was the beginning of the end for the South, but it's also, when Lincoln introduced that the federal government was really the defender of liberty for all, for everyone. We were the defender of liberty for everyone, white, black, everyone. That mindset, that American vision, that is what makes the aftermath of Gettysburg and the Gettysburg Address so immortal and important, truly. So, again, take a look. These are all photos and things that I saw and did when I was at Gettysburg. So take a look here. Hey guys, how's it going? Take my hood off here. TJ with Dead History. And I am standing in the military soldier cemetery here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And I'm going to flip you guys around here. Hold on. Okay, so you see the monument there, Soldier's Monument. Here you get kind of a look of the cemetery. As you can see, it is raining. It's a Sunday morning, about 10:30 in the morning. It's about 40 degrees, and it is raining here in Gettysburg, pretty steadily too. So, anyway, what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you guys. So this monument and everything that you guys are seeing, there's a couple monuments here. There is a monument, and I'm going to bring you guys to it that shows, it's basically a Gettysburg Address monument, so to speak. But approximate location of where the platform stood, where Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address, was probably right about where I'm standing right now. Historians over the years, they've studied a lot of the photographs. I'm going to take photographs of my own, and of course I'm going to also include some photographs that historians have studied over the years and show you like approximate locations of what they think. But this is probably, the roundabout area, somewhere in this general vicinity here, kind of somewhere in this general area of where the platform stood that Lincoln gave that famous Gettysburg Address that day. Pretty cool. This is actually my first time ever at Gettysburg. It's pretty crazy. It's only a 3-hour ride from my home. It's not too crazy of a drive, and obviously being from New Jersey, Pennsylvania right next door, but I've never been here. I think I picked kind of a cool morning, even though it's raining. It kind of gives it a unique feel. So there you go. Probably the approximate location, or somewhere. I'm probably within, I would say, 25 yards to 30 yards or so of where the platform probably was located. Gonna go take a look at some more stuff, take some pictures for you guys, and hope you enjoy. Thanks. Hey guys, TJ back with you. If you see right over my shoulder there, that is the gravesite of Jenny Virginia Wade. I have to double check her name, but Virginia Wade, I think, is really what she goes by. So there's the monument that I was just at, like right over in that area. So really, historians say that right here is really close in proximity to where Lincoln stood when he gave the Gettysburg Address. Yep, it's Mary Virginia Jenny Wade. Pretty interesting story about her. I think she was one of the only civilian deaths maybe at Gettysburg, but I gotta double check that. But anyway, I'll put a little blurb up on the screen if I can, but I'm pretty sure she was like, one of the only civilian deaths here at Gettysburg, if I remember reading correctly. Anyway, so this is really the approximate location of where Lincoln, the platform was that Lincoln stood on when he gave the Gettysburg Address. You know, you see right back there the big monument, Soldiers Monument, and then this is the gravesite of Virginia Wade. So this is really where it was. If, you know, I was just standing right like over here just a few minutes ago when I took the first videos for you. So, I mean, I was, like I said, I was within 25, 30 yards. That's exactly what it is. So right about here, guys, is where Abraham Lincoln stood that day. I mean, now I'm probably within several feet of where he actually stood. So, great stuff. Hope you guys enjoy this. If you get here, this is the Evergreen Cemetery. You got to be on the other side of the fence, inside of the Evergreen Cemetery in here, other side of that fence. Got to be in here. But this is the Evergreen Cemetery right here in Gettysburg. And yeah, right here, probably right in this area here is where Lincoln stood. So, very cool. Thanks for joining, guys. Hey guys, TJ here with Dead History, and behind me that is the Gettysburg Address, National Memorial for the Lincoln Gettysburg Address. Obviously this is not where it actually took place. That is over here. Let me flip you guys around. This is the memorial for the Gettysburg Address, but where it actually took place is back over behind that fence in the Evergreen Cemetery, as I showed you guys already. So we're gonna walk up to this. Got to be kind of quiet. It does say silence and respect. So here you go, the Lincoln Address Memorial. This monument commemorates Lincoln's Gettysburg Address on November 19th of 1863. The address was delivered about 300 yards from the spot along the Upper Cemetery Drive. The site is now marked by the Soldiers National Monument. And here you go. And I'm going to take you guys to the Soldiers National Monument too. But again, probably a bit inaccurate. Where I showed you guys is really accurate. So there you go. 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. And here is the Gettysburg Address on the wall here. And there it is. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. The words of our 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. Very cool. You just get a sense of history when you're here. I can't wait to come back and really do Gettysburg the right way, so to speak. But there you go. on a rainy February morning, standing at the memorial here. Thanks, guys. Back with you guys, standing here at the Soldiers Monument, Soldiers Memorial here at Gettysburg. So, you know, the signs and stuff will tell you like, oh, this is more the approximate location of where Lincoln gave the address, but that's not true. Or at least according to a lot of historians, it's not. Let me flip you guys. There you go. There's the beautiful monument here. And really the reality is, if you look, here's the monument, of course, you know. There's that evergreen cemetery, and right there is where Virginia Wade's, you can see the flagpole, gravesite is. And that's really more the approximate location of where the address was given, where the platform was. So, pretty cool stuff. Gotta put my hood up. Sorry, it's really raining pretty hard now, so apologize if any of these pictures are not coming out well. But so there you go, Soldiers Monument here at Gettysburg, and pretty cool stuff. Keep moving on. What's up, guys? So right there behind me, whoop, that is the Gettysburg Presbyterian Church. Turning you guys around. And that actually is where, sorry for the noise, the cars, I'm going to cross over here. This is actually where Lincoln attended a service here at this church, and actually Dwight Eisenhower, President Eisenhower. So it's the Presbyterian Church of Gettysburg. There's a mercy, and inside there are pews that both Lincoln and Eisenhower sat in that are marked inside of here. Obviously it's closed, but it just kind of gives you an idea. But there are pews in here that are marked for both where Lincoln and Eisenhower attended services and obviously sat. So pretty cool stuff. I just wanted to show you this. Thought it was kind of neat. And that's about it. I will take some pictures and move on. Thanks, guys. TJ with Dead History, and I am actually standing outside of the Willis House. And the Willis House is pretty cool because this is actually the house. Let me flip you guys over. It's actually a silly statue of, I believe that's supposed to be Perry Como and Abe Lincoln outside of here. That's out of the Lincoln House. Is it? I think so. I think it's supposed to be Perry Como and Abraham Lincoln. Pretty funny. And this is pretty cool. This is like, just got a thing here about like the Gettysburg Address, and there's the only known photograph. Anyway, back to the Willis House here. So inside of this house is where Abraham Lincoln actually finished the Gettysburg Address, writing it. He actually finished writing it. He was a guest here, you know, just hours before. And when it's open, during non-COVID times, supposedly you can go in the bedroom where Lincoln finished writing the address, and also there's the desk that he finished writing it at, and apparently, according to what I read, there's also the bed that he took a nap on, went to bed. So pretty cool. This is where Lincoln finished the infamous Gettysburg Address, here at the Willis House in Gettysburg. So pretty cool stuff. Thanks, guys. Back with you guys, and behind me, that is actually a statue, of Abraham Lincoln, supposedly signing the Emancipation Proclamation. President Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st of 1863. It's pretty cool. The reason I wanted to show you guys this too, because not only is it a really cool statue, but this was just sculpted in 2015, I believe is the date that I read. So people that might be watching this that have been to Gettysburg before, if you've been to Gettysburg back in the 90s or early 2000s or even 2010 or so, this was not here. So this was just in the past 5-6 years that this has been erected and sculpted. So it's very cool. It's beautiful, actually. I'm going to take a couple photos and then move on. This is the last of our little Gettysburg Lincoln tour for today. Hope you enjoyed it. I had a great time, even though it's been a pretty nasty, rainy day. It's been pretty cool, though. Pretty cool to see. So, there you go. Abraham Lincoln, 16th president, on January 1st of 1863, signing the Emancipation Proclamation. Thanks, guys. So there you have it, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and all the surrounding area that goes along with the Gettysburg Address and that tremendous, memorable battle that took place there. In 1864, now we're pretty much up to that time period. In 1864, the Civil War was entering its fourth blood-soaked, blood-drenched year. Lincoln's new top general was Ulysses S. Grant. Grant's nickname was the Butcher. You know, it was really, he was nicknamed the Butcher because of how aggressive he was in battle, and sometimes really at the cost of his own men. He was a very, very aggressive general, Grant was. Kind of an interesting little fact, Lincoln actually came under enemy fire on a Civil War battlefield. When Confederate troops attacked Washington, D.C. in July of 1864, Lincoln visited the front lines at Fort Stevens on 2 days of the battle, which the Union ultimately won. But at one point, the gunfire came dangerously close to the president, and legend has it that Colonel Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., a future Supreme Court justice, barked, "Get down, you fool!" And Lincoln ducked down from the fort's parapet and left the battlefield unharmed. So, pretty interesting, pretty cool thing there. You know, Lincoln's popularity at this time was really ebbed. In the election of 1864, he actually went up against a bitter rival, the general that he dismissed 2 years beforehand, George McClellan. Pretty crazy. You know, McClellan was really, really, really aggravated and did not like Lincoln after Lincoln fired him from being general of the North a couple years beforehand. And that is who ran against him in 1864. You'll see here on your screen, Lincoln, he won with 212 electoral votes. McClellan only got 21 electoral votes. So, basically, Lincoln won it handily. He really did. But in the midst of war, it would not have been absurd for Lincoln to say, you know, we're going to postpone the election. But he resisted that temptation. Abraham Lincoln believed that the thing that makes democracy work is that we hold elections. Even when the elections are difficult under circumstances, we hold elections. That's what our democracy is about. You know, Lincoln kind of had this idea of like sort of rechristening the Republican Party as the Union Party. You know, he wants the emblem of a unified single party. He actually sent his vice president packing, Hannibal Hamlin, who was his vice president in his first term. He sent him home. And he allowed the convention to choose a Democrat as his running mate to sort of give substance to the idea of this Union Party coalition, so to speak. And of course, that running mate was Andrew Johnson of Tennessee. So, you know, as I said, in the election of 1864, you're still seeing stuff on the screen here about it. Lincoln wins, but he wins no larger of the percentage of vote from the North than he had in the election of 1860. After all the accomplishments, the Emancipation Proclamation, the war, you know, all these things, 40% of white Northerners still said no to Abraham Lincoln in the election of 1864. So there's kind of an important lesson, you know, here. You know, we look back at the presidents, you know, some of these presidents, And they were not always monuments, they were not always like beloved. Lincoln definitely was not, obviously, clearly not beloved in the South, but even people in the North still had their doubts, even after 4 years of Lincoln. So, interesting enough. And then after he was reelected, over the next 5 months, the war came to a close. The South finally fell, and the Treaty of Surrender was signed by Generals Robert E. Lee and General Ulysses S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. And as the war was basically still wrapping up and concluding, Abraham Lincoln held his second inaugural address. And the amazing thing about Lincoln's second inaugural is that it was not celebratory. It was not a victory statement. He stood up there and he delivered a lecture in which he said, "We are all equally responsible for this mortal sin that we allowed to fester in our country for hundreds of years," obviously referring to slavery. So now what was going to happen? At the time, the time of the start of the Civil War, there was 400,000 African Americans in the country. And at the time, after the Civil War, during those 4 years, that number grew from 400,000 to 4 million African Americans. So a lot of people had this general thought that blacks were going to give in many of the rights that white people had. There was just kind of this overall assumption in a lot of circles that, okay, well, now that slavery's over, blacks are just going to get the same, rights as whites. And, then that brings up Reconstruction. What would Reconstruction after the war have looked like under President Lincoln? Lincoln's vision of Reconstruction probably would not have worked out because he probably would have been too lenient on white Southerners, to be honest. We're never going to know exactly what would have gone on and how he would have reacted to the continued brutal treatment in the South that blacks and people were facing. But Reconstruction inevitably would have to go on without him. It's hard to imagine, but here's a country that has just gone through perpetual crisis and loss. The country lost what today would be the equivalent of 6 million people. Yeah, if you look at the equivalent of people, it would be up like 6 million over those 4 years. Crazy. Lincoln clearly envisioned mercy for the South. He did. He envisioned in Reconstruction giving mercy to the South, but he did not leave behind a clear roadmap for the nation's reunification. He just didn't. He did have a plan for Reconstruction, never had the chance to carry it out. It is all very speculative. It is. Nobody knows for sure. We can sit here and speculate. Who knows? But the one thing that President Abraham Lincoln and, to a certain extent, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt share, they kind of share one grave shortcoming, those two. They thought that they were immortal, so to speak. And they did not prepare their vice presidents to take over office. Truman, when he got in there after FDR died, he had no idea what to do. And Andrew Johnson, after Lincoln was assassinated, he had no clue where the administration was or what the administration was planning to do, especially regarding Reconstruction after the war. No idea. He was lost in the clouds, so to speak. I'm not defending Andrew Johnson because we're going to get into him obviously next week. That's a man with a laundry list of bad decisions and things. But he really didn't have any idea what Lincoln wanted to do for Reconstruction. But yeah, the bottom line is, guys, that Lincoln he did change the office of presidency forever. He showed that one person can meet the emergency by using emergency powers. Democrats, Republicans, they are all doing what Lincoln did. Still to this day. Even more so than his hero. Abraham Lincoln's hero is George Washington before him. No person has ever changed the office of presidency so much. He was an incredible president. He truly was. And for this, and probably much more than this, Abraham Lincoln will probably go down as the greatest president in the history of our country. I don't think that there's any doubt. The more I've researched it and learned about it over the years, Washington's definitely up there, of course. But I think just due to the circumstances of the Civil War and slavery itself, I think Abraham Lincoln, in my opinion at least, my humble opinion, goes down as the greatest president that we've ever had. A man that just had tremendous pressure and difficulties during his presidency. Not to say that there hasn't been other presidents who have faced tremendous difficulties and crises. But Lincoln's, I don't know, just somehow seems to overshadow everything. But hey, you know what? Please leave your comments below, your questions. Tell me what you think. What do you guys think? Is Lincoln the greatest president that we've ever had in our lives? You know, it's definitely up for debate. That's the wonderful thing about history. History is open to interpretation. History is open to opinion. And it's all speculative. And we can always debate and argue nicely and debate nicely and agree or disagree. And that's what makes it great. That's what makes our country great. That's what makes democracy great. We're all Americans. We all have our own opinions. And, you know, we all have the ability and right to feel how we want and think what we want, form our own opinions. So I would love to hear some of your opinions down below in the comments about what you think about Lincoln. So please, of course, keep it nice and peaceful. And but please tell me what you guys think. So there you go, guys. I know this was a very long video, my longest ever, part 2 of our Abraham Lincoln 4-part series. Part 3 will be tomorrow, and we will be looking. Part 3 is all about the assassination and the death of Abraham Lincoln. Right after, obviously, his second inaugural. We're going to get into all that, what happened, John Wilkes Booth, Ford's Theater, all of it. We're going to get into that in part 3, and then part 4 will be the day after, concluding this 4-part series, where we'll look at strictly the funeral, the train procession, and the tomb out in Springfield, Illinois. So stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed this part 2, looking at the presidency and legacy of Abraham Lincoln. Again, leave those comments and questions below. Anything I missed or messed up on, please comment below. I'd love to. I don't want to ever be giving out false information. Opinions are one thing, but factual information I want to make sure I'm being correct about. So I appreciate it very much, guys. Thanks for watching, and thanks for the subscribes, the support, the comments, all of it. Really appreciate you guys so much. And we will see you tomorrow for part 3 of our 4-part series, looking at the 16th President of the United States, good old Abraham Lincoln. Thanks, guys.